Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're kind of going down a rabbit hole, I guess you could say,
Okay.
with Bitcoin and anarcho-capitalism with this guy, Jeff Berwick of
Okay.
the Dollar Vigilante.
Okay.
He's got some pretty strong opinions about the future of finance, and he does not hold back.
Interesting.
So you send in this video of Berwick, and right away, you can tell he sees the world a little differently than maybe like your average financial advisor.
Yeah, how so?
Well, he is convinced that the US dollar is on its way out.
Really? Wow.
And he is all in on these alternative currencies,
Yeah.
especially Bitcoin.
And it's not just Bitcoin, is it? It's like a whole philosophy this guy's pushing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. He calls himself an anarcho-capitalist.
And
Basically, he believes in getting rid of the government entirely
wow.
and just letting free markets decide everything.
Really? So he's like completely against any kind of government regulation.
Exactly. So when he's talking about, taxation is theft, that's not just like a catchy slogan for him. That's like a core principle of how he sees the world.
I see. So this is like really deep-rooted for this guy.
Oh, yeah. And he jumps right into this really intense example, actually. He talks about Venezuela.
Venezuela. Okay.
Paints this picture of like hyperinflation, like totally out of control. Like you need a backpack full of cash just to buy like a loaf of bread.
Oh, wow.
His point is, this is what happens when governments mismanage their economies, and Bitcoin, he argues, is like the escape route.
So he's using Venezuela as this kind of like worst-case scenario.
Yeah, like a cautionary tale.
Right, and trying to tap into that fear of economic collapse, which, I mean, let's be honest, that's a pretty powerful motivator.
Right. Especially if you're already kind of skeptical of like the whole system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, is it really a fair comparison, though? I mean, is Venezuela really like a sign of things to come for like the US dollar?
That's the question, right? And he
No.
doesn't stop there. He even says that Obama was deeply concerned about Bitcoin.
Really? Obama?
Yeah, he called it like a Swiss bank account in everyone's pocket.
Interesting. What does he mean by that?
Well, because with Bitcoin, governments can't really control it or tax it as easily.
So that's where the deeply concerned comes in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where you really see his anarcho-capitalist views. I mean, to him, Bitcoin isn't just like a new type of money. It's like a weapon against what he sees as government overreach.
No weapon? That's a strong word.
It's about like individual freedom, escaping the control of these big power structures.
I see. So it's about a lot more than just money for this guy.
Way more. He's basically begging businesses to get on board with crypto.
Yeah.
He uses this example of like a yacht taxi service.
A yacht taxi.
I know, right? Like who even knew that was a thing?
Not me.
But he says they could get a leg up on the competition by accepting Bitcoin.
Okay, but is that realistic? I mean, is anyone actually using Bitcoin to pay for yacht taxis?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, Berwick seems to think so. But it brings up this really important point about any new currency, even one as buzzy as Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's got to be widely adopted.
Right. It's got to be easy to use.
Exactly. A few yacht taxes accepting it is one thing, but to really challenge the dollar, it's got to be as easy to use as well, dollars.
I see. So widespread adoption is key.
Totally. And that's where things get a little more complicated.
How so?
Well, he brings up Silk Road. Remember that online black market that used Bitcoin?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He suggests that it was shut down not because it was dangerous, but because it threatened the government's control.
Interesting take.
Yeah.
So he's saying it wasn't about protecting people, it was about protecting the system.
Yeah, and this is where we get into that whole debate about freedom versus regulation, which always seems to come up with Bitcoin.
Yeah, because on the one hand, you've got this system that's decentralized, unregulated. Some people see that as like the ultimate freedom.
But then on the other hand, there's the potential for misuse for illegal activity.
Exactly. It's like this double-edged sword.
Totally. And I think that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. It's not always clear-cut. There are a lot of gray areas.
Absolutely. And it's important to look at it from all sides. Berwick's offering a very particular perspective. Some might even say extreme.
For sure. But to really understand the potential impact of Bitcoin,
Yeah.
you got to be willing to engage with all of the complexities, the good and the bad.
Couldn't agree more.
So we've established that Berwick sees Bitcoin as this like potential liberator, this tool for escaping government control.
Right.
But how does it actually work? How does this technology do what it does?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And it all comes down to this revolutionary technology called blockchain. When Berwick talks about Bitcoin like putting power back in the hands of individuals, he's talking about blockchain.
Okay.
Think of it like a giant digital ledger. But instead of being kept in one place, it's copied across this huge network of computers.
So it's like a global spreadsheet that everyone has access to.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. With traditional financial systems, you've got central banks and governments controlling everything.
Right.
But with blockchain, there's no single point of failure. No one entity in control.
So it's like the Wild West of finance, but with code and cryptography instead of outlaws and saloons.
You got it. And this decentralized structure is what makes Bitcoin so secure and, as Berwick would say, so liberating.
Okay, I'm starting to get why he's so fired up about this.
Because it means transactions can happen directly between individuals without needing banks or governments.
Okay, I see. But he seemed even more excited about these cryptographically secure currencies, specifically mentioning Monero. What makes them different?
Ah, yes, Monero.
Yeah.
If Bitcoin is about taking power back from the system, Monero is about going completely off the grid. It uses even more advanced cryptography
Oh, wow.
to obscure not just your identity, but like the details of every transaction.
So if Bitcoin is like using a pseudonym, then Monero is like wearing a full-on invisibility cloak.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And for someone like Berwick, who sees privacy as the ultimate form of freedom, Monero is like the holy grail of cryptocurrencies.
Okay, I get the whole privacy thing, especially with all the data breaches and surveillance these days. But isn't there another side to all this anonymity? Couldn't it also make it easier for criminals?
That's the million-dollar question. It's the classic double-edged sword of technology. Whenever you introduce greater anonymity, you inevitably open the door for potential misuse.
It's like that saying, every rose has its thorn. So how do we deal with that? How do we
Right.
balance the desire for privacy with security and accountability?
There are no easy answers.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue that we as a society need to figure out. Berwick, with his whole abolish the government thing, offers one extreme solution. But for most people, the answer probably lies somewhere in the middle. Finding ways to use these technologies while also mitigating the risks.
It sounds like we need to be having a much bigger conversation about the ethical implications of all of this. But before we go too far down that road, let's bring it back to Berwick for a sec. What's his end game here? What does he see as the ultimate outcome of all of this?
Well, Berwick's vision is nothing short of revolutionary. He believes that blockchain, especially these privacy-focused cryptocurrencies like Monero, have the potential to completely upend the power structures we take for granted. He's talking about a world where governments have much less control and individuals have more power. Like if Bitcoin is about taking control of your money, Monero is about taking control of your data.
So like a world where you pay for your coffee with Monero and tell the government to like buzz off? That's a pretty wild thought.
It is. It's radical,
Yeah.
maybe even a little utopian. But it's an interesting thought experiment. It makes you think about what kind of future we actually want.
But isn't that where those ethical questions come back again? Like what happens if this technology ends up in the wrong hands? Could it be used to help criminals or even hurt democracy?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're basically in uncharted territory here, exploring these new possibilities, but there are definitely new risks too.
It's like we're back to the Wild West analogy.
Right. We got to watch out for the outlaws as well as the pioneers.
So where do we even go from here? How do we even start to understand something this complex that's changing so fast?
I think the most important thing is to stay curious. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. And don't be afraid to get into the nitty-gritty of how it all works. The more you understand the tech, the better prepared you'll be for whatever comes next.
So it's like learning a new language almost.
Exactly. The more fluent we get in the language of blockchain and crypto, the more we can be a part of the conversation.
And who knows, maybe we'll even build something amazing with these tools.
That's the spirit. The future belongs to those willing to experiment.
Speaking of experimenting, Berwick seemed pretty gung-ho about ditching the traditional systems altogether. He even told students to drop out of school and just go all in on crypto. Seems a little extreme, don't you think?
Let's just say Berwick's known for being very passionate about his beliefs. But while I wouldn't say everyone should drop out of school right now, there's a valuable lesson in there about taking charge of your own education. The world's changing fast, and the old ways of learning aren't always keeping up.
So it's more about finding your own path and just following the one that's laid out for you.
Exactly. And that's really at the heart of what Berwick's saying, even if his methods are a bit out there. It's about individual empowerment, questioning things, and being open to the unknown.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there like one final thought, one big takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Here's something to think about. Berwick believes blockchain and crypto could lead to a future without government control. Whether or not you agree with him, it raises a bigger question. What role do we want these technologies to play in shaping our future? What would a world designed around individual empowerment, privacy, and decentralized systems really look like?
Yeah.
How can we each play a part in building that future, whatever it may be? Those are questions worth considering.
I think you've just given our listeners a lot to chew on, and that's what the deep dive is all about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper into the ideas that matter most.